Welcome to Built to Go, a Vanlife podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Wagg, coming to you from the College of Curiosity. This time we're going to talk about why less is more. Yep, we're going to revisit minimalism and what it means for you and why it's one of the most appealing parts of van life. We're also going to talk about the difference between 12-volt converters and 12-volt Inverter-Chargers. We're going to have a product review by Nellie, who lives in a can and has air conditioning, and a tale from the road that's rather personal. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me here. Once again, I'm a day late and $1 short, and what's worse is I recorded the entire episode on time, and then time got away from me, and now it's Thursday, and now I'm just editing. That's all, which is actually the hardest part. And I've decided I don't like it, and I'm going to re-record it. So here I am on Thursday morning, re-recording it. So, hey, welcome. Some quick business things. First off, everyone who requested a sticker that I offered a couple weeks ago, I am on it. I know you haven't heard anything from me. I promise you those stickers are coming. Just give me a little bit more time to get organized. Also, I had planned to announce a trip that I'm organizing, and then it took off. It went crazy. This is a trip in 2026. I figured I'd have time to put together a website and everything, but all I did was mention this trip, and dozens of people flocked, and that's what I've been dealing with the last couple weeks, because this is a small ship company, and each booking takes a long time. And this will lead into the main topic here. But before we get to that, let me just offer this to you. And if this is of interest to you, let me know. I have booked a group on the ship Royal Clipper, which is the world's largest sailing vessel that's still in service. It is a 5-masted, full-rigged ship. It's an actual sailing ship with 42 sails that actually work, and the passengers actually can help put the sails up. They can also steer the ship and stare into the binnacle to make sure that we're on course. This ship is taking us from Lisbon, Portugal to Malaga, Spain. It's a one-way trip. It's going to stop at a few ports in between, including Gibraltar, making this a 3-country voyage. Pricing starts at about $2,500 per person, and what that's worth is up to you to figure out. We're given the market as it is this morning. I have no idea how the dollar is faring against the euro or the Canadian dollar or the British. Who knows? We live in uncertain times, but we also live in times where if there's something you want to do, you'd better do it, because the chances to do things could be more limited than we thought, and spending a few days with some really interesting people on the high seas on an actual sailing ship could be the thing. I don't have a link for you because of the way this has worked out. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, Google Royal Clipper, see what I'm talking about, and then drop me a line at jeff@builttogo.com. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. Now, the reason we're doing this trip is that, well, things are too big. In June, I have another trip. We're taking a bunch of people to Norway on a massive cruise ship called MSC Virtuosa. Now, as massive as this ship is, and by massive, it's 4.5 Titanics in size. That's the unit I use to measure ships. This thing's huge. It's not even close to the biggest. Icon of the Seas is the world's largest cruise ship, and I think it is in the neighborhood of 6 Titanics. It has water slides. It has skydiving. I mean, the stuff on ships now is crazy. And this does relate to van life. If you are a person in life and you come into the ability to acquire things, meaning that you have earned some wealth or whatever, you find yourself in a position where you can afford to buy things, you probably will. And if you go through this process, which I have, you will find yourself having a lot of things. And that is fun and okay until it isn't. And it is not the only way to live. You know, in the US, there is this motto of greed is good from the 80s that has somehow made a resurgence. And there is this idea that he who has the most toys wins, and all these concepts. And ultimately, it's actually not true. It's he who has lived the most experiences wins, at least in my opinion. Of course, you get to pick your own opinions. And I think a lot of people are attracted to van life not because it is a collection of more things, but because it is an optimization of the things you have and is actually a collection of less things. And that's how we ended up on this sailing vessel rather than one of the giant cruise ships. It's too much. It's too much. If you travel on Icon of the Seas, they do 7-day voyages to pretty boring ports, honestly. You're going to be on a floating amusement park for 7 days, and you may not even get to see everything. And everything's complicated. It used to be you could get on the ship and everything was included. You know, that's the way cruising was. You pay up front, you get on the ship, everything's included, fine dining, all the entertainment, it's just all included. You enjoy your time without having to worry about paying for anything or making decisions other than what fun thing do I want to do today. But that's changed drastically. Icon of the Seas, which is one of the most popular ships sailing today, with its 10,000 people on board, literally, that is with crew and passengers, presents you with so much to do that you can't possibly do it all in a week. And it's complicated. And this is the part that's important. It's the complexity of it all that actually detracts from your life. A typical day on that ship means you have a whole bunch of different things to do, but some are included, some aren't, some have different times, some have different requirements. Everything is overwhelming. If you want to do this, it costs this. If you want to do that, it costs this. But if you have a plan, it's less. However, if you're in this kind of cabin, well, then you get a discount. Or if you're in this kind of cabin, well, then you're super special and you get all this stuff for free, but not drinks. You can't get those drinks for free. You have to pay for them separately. And if you do pay for them separately, like if you get a drinks package, you get all the drinks you want, except for the ones that are over this price or the ones that are in the mini bar conveniently included in your cabin, which is, where you would want to get a drink, say 4 o'clock in the morning. If you're thirsty and you just want a Diet Coke, that's where you're going to go. But that Diet Coke is going to cost you $6, despite the fact that you just spent $90 a day on a drink package. There's everything you could ever want on this ship. It has everything. And yet, it doesn't have the one thing that I think a lot of people want from Vanlife, and that is intentionality. It is the ability to control your day, to be in charge of your destiny, and do exactly what you want. Now, there's an argument to be made here that if you have more things, you can do more things. And I know there's a lot of people who live by that mentality. But I'm going to use another analogy here because I live in analogy land, and that is of the Swiss Army knife. Now, as a kid, I was fascinated by Swiss Army knives. They came in these gigantic things that, wow, this little red thing you can fit in your pocket could open cans, it could cut paper, it had scissors and a toothpick and tweezers, and if you hold it the right way and put it on a record player, you can spin it around and it'll play the record. All right, I made that part up, but it's not that far off. And when I became an adult and I could actually buy things like this, I did. I bought a Swiss Army knife, a fairly modest one, not one of the gigantic ones, and I found that, technically, it could do all those things. But it did them terribly. Swiss Army knives are not good at anything. They are jacks of all trades, like me, and therefore not very good at anything, like me. And so if you buy one of these things, you will have the technical ability to do a bunch of things, but you won't have the literal ability to do a lot of things. Because the tool and all of its stuff that you're not using at the time, all those extra things where you pull out one blade and the scissors and the magnifying glass and the file are in the way, all that stuff gets in the way. And it's the same thing with collecting possessions. So instead of the Swiss Army knife, I have moved on to the Leatherman, a multi-tool. It has a lot less on it than a Swiss Army knife. But all of the tools on a Leatherman are very usable. No, they are not as good as a dedicated tool. A dedicated pair of pliers is a better pair of pliers than a Leatherman. But a pair of pliers can't open a box from Amazon as easily or neatly. I mean, I guess you could do a whole lot with a pair of pliers, but you get what I mean. This is a useful tool, and it is an optimal tool. And for me, minimalism isn't just about having less stuff. It's about having optimal stuff. It's along the lines of everything in your van has to serve two purposes, it's like that. For me, the Leatherman is the primary tool I have used to build out my vans. Now, the battery-powered drill sure gets a lot of credit there too, and that hole saw was really handy. And the jigsaw, yeah, I use that a lot too. But the tool I used every single time I was in that van, no matter what I was doing, putting carpet on the walls, putting the floor down, assembling furniture, doing electrical work or plumbing, everything. The Leatherman was there, and it was always trying to help me. And I'm not here selling you a Leatherman. There's many good multi-tools on the market. I just happen to be in the Leatherman world, and I haven't bought a Leatherman in probably 10 years because mine's lasted that long, although it's getting a little old. The Leatherman, I think, is the perfect minimalist ideal, and for me, I hold it up as a model as to what I want my van life to be like. This enables me to do all the things I want to do with the minimal amount of crap in the way. Getting back to the real world, what does this look like in your van? Well, it means you don't fill your van up with a whole bunch of crap. The whole point of having your van is to have less stuff. Not everybody agrees with that. A lot of the overlanders pride themselves on hanging as much junk on the sides of their rigs as they can, just in case they need it one day. And that is completely fine. I'm just saying that that's only one perspective. There is an attractiveness to not doing that and to having your vehicle be exactly what you need to do the things you want. The vehicle is not the end of the game. Having all that stuff is not the end of the game. The end of the game is having experiences that last forever. Nobody can take your experiences away from you. Sure, they might be able to change your perspective on them, but that's okay. That's gaining something. Gaining a new perspective is always useful. But all those things, all those gadgets, all that stuff isn't van life. Van life is not about the van. It's about a mindset, at least for me. So as you're building out your van and you see all these cool things people have done, all these expensive, complicated things, like recirculating showers and enough batteries and solar to power a small city for 6 days. And it goes on and on and on. Think about all that stuff, cool as it might be. That's really neat. I say that all the time. And think about what it will actually do to enhance the experiences you're going to have in van life. In my opinion, minimalism is not about deprivation. It's not about living with less. It's not about being a mendicant out there just hoping the universe will provide for you. That's a whole different philosophy, and that's as valid as any other. For me, minimalism is clearing away all the clutter that's getting in the way of you having the experiences you're out there to have. Less actually is more. And van life is an attractive way to accomplish that, even if it's only part-time. Now, if you're somebody like I used to be, and I try not to be, despite appearances, your camper van can be just another object that you've collected, but it can also be a vehicle of freedom, an escape pod, which is a theme that comes up a lot in van life, to get you away from everything else, even if it's just part-time. I present these thoughts to you not to encourage you to do anything other than you want to do, just to give you a new perspective, a new tool that you will now have that you can use or not, but that can never be taken away from you. Special thank you to Michael and Jason for making it so there are no ads on this podcast. It's much appreciated. They went to buymeacoffee.com/built-to-go and bought me some diesel. There are no ads, and there will be no ads so far as I can see because you guys have been very, very generous with me. If you would like to help keep ads off the podcast, please visit buymeacoffee.com/built-to-go. You'll see a button there to buy a gallon of diesel. That would be most appreciated, and thanks to all of you who do this every month. You're my heroes. And no, seriously, it is much nicer living without ads. I appreciate it. Van life news. Yep, it's kind of amazing. I completely forgot this section last night when I was recording, so I'm glad I waited till this morning. Anyway, let's get into it. So, the news, the news is still difficult. I don't know what's going on, and I don't know how to give you any advice at all as to what you should buy or what you shouldn't. I don't know. I'm sorry. I wish I could give you something good, something solid, but on that topic, I can't. So instead, I present you this other news that, let's see, pretty bad, kind of bad, and maybe good. So it's not the worst thing. So let's jump in here. Idaho. It has outlawed stealth van life. And what I mean by that is it is now illegal, or it soon will be illegal if this thing actually completely passes, to sleep in your van at night anywhere other than a campground, basically. If you're just going to pull up into some street that looks like a good place to park and camp out there, yeah, it's going to be illegal if you're in a town of more than 100,000 residents. Now, the good news is that Idaho is not the most populated place in the world, so there are plenty of places that do not have a population like that. But if a town or city doesn't enforce this, they get a $10,000 fine. So that's the state fining the town or city. It's up to the town or city to decide what they're going to do to enforce it. So it's all kind of amorphous and tricky and weird. And in the real world, this may not impact all that many people, but, it's just another slip down the slippery slope. And it's going to be an excuse for some people to knock on your window at night and say, get the hell out of here. It's also an excuse to continually add to a stigma to people living in their vehicles, which I think is tragic. Anyway, I'll have a link in the show notes. This was from Boise Dev, which is a business website for the southern Idaho area. And number 2, Crater Lake, which is one of the most fascinating places in North America. It is the deepest lake in the United States, not the deepest lake in North America. That one is Great Slave Lake in Canada's Northwest Territories. Whole story on why it's named that. But anyway, we're talking about Crater Lake. Crater Lake is a very, very cool, interesting, weird place that I've always wanted to visit. And I was so close to actually being there, but I had just driven so many thousands of miles that the extra couple hundred miles was too much at the time, and I turned around, and I regret that, although it was the right decision at the time. Anyway, you can't really go there anymore. Well, you can. Here's the deal. It's been loved to death, unfortunately. Just like so many places in the U.S., Crater Lake recently has been really inundated with tourists. Post-COVID thing, everyone's getting out there, which is good, but unfortunately it has consequences. And they're going to close the lake to swimmers and boat tours for 2 years. So for 2 years, you'll be allowed to go to Crater Lake, and you can see it from, the caldera, the rim of the caldera, because it is just a giant collapsed volcano. But that's it. You're not going to be able to, go out to Wizard Island or anything like that. And it's kind of a shame. They're going to stop hikes, and it's just overuse. They want to give the land a chance to recover a bit, and there's a report here that there's a composting toilet. The only thing there is, and it's been overflowing, and it can't keep up with the use, and all this stuff. So, yeah, they're going to close it. So, apparently, they're going to close it not this year, but next year and in 2027. So if you had planned to go visit Crater Lake in 2026 and 2027, you will only be able to get a distant view of it. You won't be able to actually experience the full thing, sadly. And finally, I don't know that this counts as news, and I promise you that this is not sponsored, but it's something I ran across, so it's news to me. And that is that a company by the name of Outside Van, who is an outfitter, they take your van and turn it into a camper van, has a new line called Baseline. Now, I do not report on the news of every outfitter coming out with a new line, but this one caught my attention because they build it out in such a way that it isn't built out. What they do is they take your van, or they will provide a van, and then they do all the hard stuff. Now, for me, the hard stuff is the stuff like covering the walls and floors, putting in windows, and all that kind of stuff. And the plumbing and electrical stuff is actually the easy stuff for me. That might not be the case for you. It might be exactly the opposite. But for me, that stuff is easy. The hard stuff is making the inside into a livable space. And that's what they do. You give them your van or you buy one from them, and they give you a van that is completely finished in the inside, and all you have to do is add your own furniture and whatever else you want. They will include a bed platform with this, and you just put a mattress on it and you're basically done, but there are no cabinets or plumbing or solar or batteries or anything like that. You have to add all that. I find this particularly attractive because it gives you the maximum customization for your van, because you can do all that work yourself, and you can get a really professionally built van for less money than you might expect, although it is not cheap. One of the drawbacks is that they're using sprinters, and, well, I have lots to say about sprinters, but one thing that everybody will have to agree is that sprinters are expensive. So if you get the baseline 144 from them, it starts at $89,000, and for $89,000, you get a Sprinter van completely ready to have furniture and stuff added to it. It's a lot of money, but for some buyers, it's a nice compromise between building out the whole thing yourself or paying a lot more money to have the thing completely built out. So if that sounds interesting to you, take a look. It's outsidevan.com/baseline/. And again, this is of last week. This week, the prices could be completely different because we have a new world order today, or something. It's probably going to be different next week. Tech Talk. So, my buddy Hal is completely obsessed with the electrical system in his trailer. He did something interesting. He has, I think it's a 2015 trailer, fairly small trailer. This is the kind of trailer you can take anywhere you want. And it's made by Coleman, standard kind of trailer. You know, you go in the door and the bed is there and there's a dinette and the kitchen and a separate bathroom, and it's everything you need is right there. And he's doing more camping, and he's like, well, what should I do in the future? And he starts looking at new stuff, and then he thought that there's nothing wrong with his camper, except some things need to be updated. So rather than buying a new camper, he just updated his old one. And I think that was brilliant, because the build quality of a 2015 camper is much better than the build quality of campers today. I know there's variance, but if you look on any of the groups about campers and RVs, they're all going to tell you this, that build quality today is terrible. I mean, I know that's true for the Airstream folks. But one of the things he did was he installed solar, and he did that professionally. But he also got rid of his converter. Let's take a step back here, and I know I've talked about this before, but a converter is a device that will take 110 volts AC in the US, in other countries it's 220 volts AC, and turn that into 12 volts. That's it. It's the opposite of an inverter, basically. It takes 110, turns it into 12 volts, and then it uses that 12 volts to do two things. The first thing it does is provide power to all your 12 volt accessories in the trailer or your van, and if you have one of those, that's the lights and the furnace motor and your refrigerator if you have a 12 volt compressor fridge, that type of thing. Obviously, this is when you're plugged in we're talking about here. This is when you have shore power. But it also charges your batteries, and it doesn't have a charger in it. Basically, it just throws a high amperage circuit onto the battery, and that's what it does. And that worked great for lead-acid batteries. But now, lead acid is really, really going away except as starter batteries. And so if you're redoing your rig and you're getting rid of lead acid and putting in lithium, it doesn't really make sense to use a converter. I mean, it will work, but it's only going to charge your batteries, your lithium batteries, up to maybe 80% or so. And then how does it get all the way charged? If you have solar as well, the solar can top it off because your solar controller will give it a profile charge, which will enter that mode, that voltage that you need to get up there. But it seems like kind of a waste, right? You got shore power and you're only able to charge your battery to 80%. So there's a new thing out there. I mean, it's not that new, but it's confusing because this thing sounds like the wrong thing, and yet it does the same thing. And that is a charger inverter, or an inverter-charger, depending. And I just said an inverter is the opposite of a converter, and that is correct. But this is two devices combined into one. So an inverter takes 12 volts and turns it into 110 volts, or 240 volts, depending on where you are. Turns it into mains power, household current. And it also turns it from DC into AC. That process is an inversion, and that's where you get the word inverter. Why are we talking about this in this context? Because they now come with built-in chargers. So if you plug into shore power, your inverter charger will charge your batteries. And it's a conditioned charge. It will charge your lithium batteries all the way up where they should be. If it'll do that, why would you need a converter? And in fact, you don't. This thing will replace your converter. It does things a little differently. While your converter provides 12-volt power to everything in your van, like in real time, you plug your rig in and the converter takes that power and then sends 12 volts to your lights. This does things a little different. Your battery is going to supply power to the lights. This thing is going to charge your battery at the same time. So it's kind of moving where the power is. It makes your battery sort of a middleman. Or another way to look at it is, everything 12 volt in your rig is always going to be powered by your battery. This thing will make sure your battery stays charged. A converter doesn't work that way. But this is better. It's better. Honestly, I don't think converters should exist anymore. I think that's old tech that doesn't make sense ever. Even if you have lead acid batteries, it doesn't make sense because this inverter-charger thing is better. It's smarter. When you plug it in, they automatically swap between the inverter and shore power because you should not have your inverter on while you have shore power on. It will basically switch over to charger mode. And then when you unplug it, it'll turn the charger off because there's no power, obviously. And then if you want, you can turn on the inverter. I'm not talking about a specific brand here. I'm talking about the concept. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It took me a while to figure out exactly what it would look like to install one of these in a rig that had a converter. And it turns out that the way the professionals do it is they take out the converter. They just get rid of it. Then it's not that big of a deal. The converter is just this metal box and you can take it out and you just put the wiring where it needs to go. You can keep the fuse block part of it. If you are building out a new rig, I would say don't get a converter. In fact, if you're somebody who boondocks all the time, you may not need even a charger. You probably would be better off with solar. But you can get solar, and on those times where you do plug into shore power, an inverter charger will put you right where you need to be. Does that make sense? It's a little confusing because of the terms, but it doesn't really matter. All you need to know is that when you're building out your rig, if you want to be able to charge the batteries while you're plugged into shore power, and you want to be able to have 110 volts when you are not connected to shore power, an inverter charger is the thing to get. It will solve all of your problems. Product review. So I now have in my possession an EcoFlow air conditioner, which I have not had a chance to test yet because I still pretty much can't walk. But soon. I mean, I have batteries. I have everything I need to test this thing out. My first impression is that it's pretty big. I was kind of surprised at how big the thing is, and I'm not even talking about the hoses yet. Just the unit itself. It's pretty big, but I will totally do the whole test and let you know how that goes. In the meantime, because I'm probably not going to be able to test a Zero Breeze, Nellie in a Can from the Discord channel was kind enough to offer a review of the one she has. And here it is.
Hi, I'm Nellie, and I travel and live most of the time in a 2014 Transit Connect. About 3/4 of the year I stay in this thing, and I decided to get an air conditioner because I go to bed pretty early and I wake up early just to beat the heat and get my computer work done when my brain is functional. So when you go to bed before sundown, it's hot in the evening. So I was looking for a way to stay cool in a parking spot. I got the Zero Breeze Mark II. It's a real portable air conditioner. It's not a swamp cooler. You guys know what those are. I don't even have fridge or a freezer in my rig to have ice to put into those things. The Zero Breeze, it's lightweight, compact, and it's durable. I've banged this thing around and it's held up pretty well. It's totally been a game changer, especially this year. So initially I got this unit with one battery and a standard charger. I was putting it onto 2 milk crates in the passenger seat. And at first I just had the foam that it comes with, and I cut out a cutout for my passenger window. And I thought somebody could punch through that if they wanted to get me. So I created this thing that I called the airplane wing. It's a sheet insulation and then sheet aluminum, which is a great material to work with. I made it so it kind of straddled the glass of the passenger window, and then it's pointy at the top so you can roll it right up into the window. And then you could vent the two hoses that go to the air conditioner through this. That works great, but it's just a pain in the ass to set up. So I had the 2 milk crates. I had to tilt it just right, otherwise this thing would leak all over the seat. And then once you have it set up, you don't really want to go anywhere because you have to take it all down. So I didn't like that. I felt like once I set up for the night, I was stuck. And then the other thing is, if I just wanted to run it off the battery for a few hours until it got cooler later in the night, I didn't feel like doing all that work was really worth it. So I would either suffer or I would get a campsite when I really only wanted the AC for a few hours in the evening, because I wasn't about to, open this up and set everything up at a Cracker Barrel and then undo it all in the morning at dawn. Last year, maybe I got a campsite a little bit more often than I really needed to, just because I wanted to plug in if it was going to be hot. I don't like being hot. It's uncomfortable. This year, I put vents on the outside of my van. This thing sits at the end of my bed. I just a minute ago switched from doing work to creating this audio, and I've been turning it on and off, blowing cold air on myself, and I'm sitting here at a trailhead somewhere in Georgia. It's just been really nice having this thing hooked up. I've been boondocking for the past week or so, and I just turn it on for 30 minutes, turn it off. No big deal. There's no messing around with the milk crates or the front seat or the window or anything. So if you're going to use this thing on just battery and you have it on full blast, it'll last about 4 hours. If you have it on cool, it'll last about 8 hours. I liked having the battery in my previous setup with the window mess because I could keep the dog cool. Like if I was going rock climbing, I could turn this on and keep the dog cool, parked in the shade, and not have to worry about it so much. But what I have going on now with it permanently set up has been a game changer, because I can just pull over in the middle of the day and get on and do some work if I want to. The accessories that I want to talk about, first of all, the batteries are slim and they worked really great for all the things that I wanted to charge. They lasted me a long time. But the shape of them, they could go between my bed and the wall, or they could go at the head of my bed, between the bed and the back of the passenger seat. So I really like the batteries. There's a charger you can get for like the cigarette lighter to charge the battery. I did not like that. I felt like it was getting way too hot, so I don't recommend that. But you do need an adapter if you're going to do what I did with the 2 batteries and the plug. So the adapter connects to the unit, both batteries, and the charging plug-in. So if I were to pull up to a campsite right now and plug in, I would be charging both batteries and I can run the unit. So that's kind of essential. Let's see, pros and cons. So the customer service was good. I think I had one battery that just stopped working randomly, and it was really weird. They paid for it to be shipped back, and they repaired or replaced it. And then I broke it once because I kicked the USB-C when it was plugged in, and it broke its insides, so it wouldn't work anymore. I had to pay $250 that included shipping and the repair. I don't know, as much money as I've spent on them, $250 to get a new battery after I broke. I think they have good customer service. It's lightweight, it's compact. The only bad part is the setup. It needs to be vented and it needs to drain. So as long as you have that covered, I think you're golden. Also keep in mind that the hoses do emit heat, so you want to keep those short or just prepare for that. It is expensive, but I don't have a lot of expensive things in my van. This is the most pricey thing I have as far as my build goes. So I think it's worth it. I think it's paid for itself, just keeping me out of hotels when it's been too hot. I've been able to plug in at a campsite when it's too hot. And then this year, I'm going to save even more money. I just don't want to fry. And I love it. I hope you find this helpful. Happy trails, and we'll see you down the road.
Well, Nellie, thank you very much for the cool review. Actually, you made me want one of those, and I've got an EcoFlow now, so how is that going to work? Who knows what the future holds. Anyway, thanks so much for that. Nellie was kind enough to give us an affiliate code, which is actually a serious discount. So if that sounded good and you'd like to check it out, visit the show notes, and Nellie's affiliate link is in the show notes. And right now, this thing that she's talking about, the package she has with the 2 batteries, normally retails for $2,400. These things aren't cheap, but the deal she has will get you one for less than $1,800. And if you just want the air conditioner part without the batteries, like maybe you have a big bank of batteries, it's $899. And that's not bad. I mean, it's not as good as the smoking deal I got on my EcoFlow, but it was an impressive review. That's all I'm going to say. So thank you very much, Nellie, and you guys get to compare and contrast that with what I do with my EcoFlow. One note, though, and Nellie mentioned this twice, these things do produce water, right? So you've got an intake hose and an outtake hose. You got to deal with those, but you also have to deal with condensate water, just like the air conditioner that's in your rig's engine or your air conditioner in your house or whatever. Water is going to come out of this, so make sure you have a plan for that before you figure out how you're going to install this, because it is going to drip water, and it may have a little container, but it's going to overflow. It doesn't take that long. So thanks again, Nellie. Tales from the road. I mentioned this in some Discord server or other, and people asked me for the story, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready to tell this story. But okay, I'm going to tell the story. So, as you may or may not know, I visited every place named Aurora in the United States and Canada twice, basically, in 2019 and in 2021, and I haven't actually revealed a lot about the things that happened to me on that trip. And, you know, there's nothing earth-shattering here, but there were a lot of insights and a lot of little moments, and I really need to put them down in some form or other, and I have a plan for that. And I know I've had several plans for that if you've been listening to the podcast for a long time, but I still have a plan for it. Anyway, this is one of those stories, and it involves West Virginia. So there's an Aurora in West Virginia. It's a very small town. It's a very hilly town, and it's a beautiful town. It's probably most famous for its old-growth forest there. That's one of the last in the country. They have old-growth hemlocks, which are not common at all. It's called Cathedral Forest, and you can go visit that, and I did, and it's beautiful and amazing, and it actually reminded me of the Pacific Northwest more than anything else I've seen in the East. So that alone is a reason to go to Aurora. But when I visited these Auroras, I wasn't just trying to go to the most famous spot. I was trying to understand life there and see what it was like. So I spent the whole day driving around these hollows and back roads. And, well, if you've never been to West Virginia, there's really not a lot of other places like it. There's no flat land, really, to speak of. I mean, if they want to make a soccer field, it's a major problem. It's the most mountainous state in the country. If you thought that was Colorado, I'm happy to inform you that Colorado ranks 25th because half the state is flat. West Virginia, it ain't flat. It's got no flatness. In fact, West Virginians call people from other states Flatlanders, and they have earned that. If you live in West Virginia, yeah, everyone else is a Flatlander. And so I'm driving around and noticing how everything looks familiar, and the reason it looks familiar is because I went to college in West Virginia. When I graduated high school at age 17, because of the way the calendars work, I decided to get a degree, and this is not a joke. I didn't get a degree, that's another story, but I attempted to get a degree in Boy Scouts. Yeah, there was a degree for Boy Scouts. It was called Youth Agency Administration, and you would go get a bachelor's degree and learn how to run Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, YMCA, YWCA, 4-H, Campfire, all those programs. That was the idea, and I wanted to do that because I was so into Boy Scouts. And one of the only programs that was anywhere near where I was from, Salem, Massachusetts, was this school, Salem College in Salem, West Virginia, which is terrible. I'm from Salem, Massachusetts. I'm going to Salem's College in Salem, West Virginia. Yeah. And then I went to Salem State College, and my transcript is a disaster. Anyway, we're talking about Aurora. But the reason Aurora, West Virginia had such a big impact on me is because I had lived in West Virginia for 2 years. And I've never lived anywhere like it. It was one of the friendliest and starkest and poorest and self-reliant places I have ever been, and I will always miss it. It has an impact on you. If you live in West Virginia, it's the kind of place that sticks with you. And as I drove around Aurora, West Virginia, in this absolutely beautiful landscape, I mean, I know you've heard me sing rhapsodic about Vermont, but West Virginia is also one of these places that everywhere you turn with a camera, you're going to capture a postcard. And I see, little modest houses, there's a cemetery on the hill, and there's a creek, and it's idyllic. And yet, West Virginia can't catch a break. West Virginia is one of the poorest states in the country. And every time it looked like they were going to make way for themselves and become a growing concern in the United States, they get it snatched away from them. The state's population is collapsing, the poverty rates are incredible, drug addiction's an enormous problem, and they're being taken advantage of by people who they think are their friends. The big coal industry, obviously West Virginia's got a huge history in coal. I mean, West Virginians will tell you that their grandparents built this country in the 40s and 50s, and they're not wrong. All the energy we used back then, a lot of it came from West Virginia. And so they think that coal is their heritage. And all that needs to happen is for coal to come back, and then they will be back again. The money will be coming in. But it's a lie, because it has nothing to do with the coal anymore. Because even if coal did come back now, the miners wouldn't go back to work. The mining process has been so streamlined and optimized that those workers who were down there underground with pickaxes, hammering at coal, risking their lives, ruining their health, wouldn't be needed anymore. If you've ever seen or read The Hunger Games, yeah, that's West Virginia. Katniss is from West Virginia. That's what we're talking about. But unfortunately, these folks in West Virginia keep getting told by the coal companies that coal's coming back, and, this person says they're going to bring coal back, and we need to vote for them. And in fact, the only pockets that are being lined there are the pockets of the coal companies who absolutely want to get big coal contracts. None of that money's going to trickle down to West Virginians. There aren't going to be more jobs. There's just going to be more coal coming out of the state, and that's just... Anyway, it breaks my heart. I mean, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. West Virginia breaks my heart, and there was one point in Aurora where, like all these small towns, there's a little main street area, and like all West Virginia towns, or most of them, this one wasn't flat. It went up and down and everything. And I found a little convenience store, and I found a restaurant. And in the convenience store, there was a woman, a little bit older than me, running the store, and she seemed very pleasant. And I went in the store and looked at, it's one of these old country stores with the worn wooden floors and not a whole lot of light, but there's racks of chips and things, and then also a lot more household goods than you'd find, say, at a 7-Eleven. You really could actually go grocery shopping in this little store. It would cost you an arm and a leg, but if you needed to make a cake from scratch, you could go in there and find all the ingredients. It was one of those kind of stores. And the woman was very pleasant, and we talked about how I used to live in the state, and I went to school there, and, it's 150 miles away or so she wasn't all that familiar with it, but instantly that same friendly West Virginia hospitality flowed through me, and I felt like I was home again. And I went back out to my van, sat down, and the tears flowed. That was the moment of all the Aurora places I'd visited and all the things I've seen, and I know I haven't told you those stories yet, but that was the moment that it just hit me that West Virginia is this tragically beautiful place that nobody can catch a break there. It is the place that if you live there, you have almost no chance of making it. You have to leave the state because there's nothing there for you. There's no prospect of employment. There's no prospect of any employment coming ever, unless you're an artist or somebody who can make their job remotely. Hey, Vanlife folks, there's not much for you there. And it's just tragic. So after I took a moment to compose myself, I went down the road and I found a diner kind of. It was basically a house that a main room of the house had been turned into a dinner spot. And I went in there and had a very fine, modest dinner. And the woman who was taking care of me, the waitress, looked like she was working. You know, she looked like she was a professional, somebody who was doing her best to do everything she could, but she also seemed a little bit overwhelmed at the same time. And I was imagining what her life was like and realizing that this is the only job in town. I basically had met the only people in town who had jobs in that town. There wasn't anything else. And it reminded me that when I first went to West Virginia in 1984, in Salem, West Virginia, which is not too far from Clarksburg, which would be the bigger town near there, there were fast food places. You know, not in Salem. Salem wasn't big enough for that. We had a Dairy Queen. That was our big thing. It was seasonal. We had a seasonal Dairy Queen. But as you got out of town, there were McDonald's and things. And having come from Massachusetts and being a 17-year-old, I was surprised at who was working at the McDonald's. It wasn't kids. It was 35-year-old men behind the counter taking care of everything. And I had never seen that before. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Why haven't I seen that before? And then I realized that 35-year-old men typically are the ones who get the best jobs in town. And they had. It was McDonald's. I looked for a job while I was in college, and I went down to the little tiny Ben Franklin. We had a Ben Franklin. That was a big deal. And I said, hey, so, you know, I'm up at the college. I'm going to be here all year, and I'm wondering if there might be any work. And the woman just kind of gave me this look and said, oh, sweetie, we haven't even hired anybody in 4 years. And the Ben Franklin, which is the kind of place you would think would have rapid turnover, hadn't hired anybody in 4 years. And none of the college students had jobs off campus. There weren't any. There was nothing they could do. I mean, anyway, I've talked too long. But if you travel enough and you pay attention, you're going to have moments like this too, where you're going to see something so near beautiful and yet impossibly far away because of something stopping things. And West Virginia is definitely that. If you're traveling around the country, you're likely not going to drive through West Virginia. It's one of those states that you actually have to make a point to go to because of the way the interstates are. That's no slight against West Virginia. It's due to topography. In fact, the entire story of West Virginia is due to topography. But you should go. And I hope to go back. I really do. A place to visit. Well, I figured might as well do a place to visit in West Virginia, but this is a very different kind of West Virginia. This is up in the Panhandle. I mean, Aurora's not too far from the Panhandle. Aurora's almost near where the arm sticks out of West Virginia. This is in the crux of the elbow, and it is Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. You have probably heard of Harpers Ferry. You may not have realized that that's in West Virginia. Now, the Panhandle is a bit different. The state is strangely shaped, and this Panhandle is heavily influenced by the states around it, Maryland and Pennsylvania. It's not that far from D.C. I actually knew people who worked in D.C. who lived in West Virginia. But Harpers Ferry is special. First off, incredible history. You've heard of John Brown and his raid and taking over the armory and the violence and John Brown's bodies moldering in the grave and all that. The birth of the Civil War, that happened in Harpers Ferry, and you can visit all that. But the town is worth going to anyway, just to see all these old buildings and to see what a prosperous town of the mid-19th century looked like, because they preserved quite a bit of it, which is remarkable, because this place floods like crazy. You can walk around downtown and you'll see these white lines on the buildings and look up. You're like, what is that? And then you'll notice that there's a date next to it. And that was the height of that flood. And they're way over your head. It's also a pretty cool place for recreation. The rivers that go through there are fairly shallow and fairly broad, and they're perfect for tubing. In fact, that's a big thing there. People will throw their kids in the river with the tubes and then drive down and pick them up a few miles downstream. That is a fun thing to do there. Again, it's West Virginia. You have to make an effort to go here. But Harpers Ferry might be a good place to visit this year if you're interested in learning a bit about U.S. history and you're concerned about going to all the national parks and monuments and stuff that might have staffing problems. Harpers Ferry might have staffing problems too, but it doesn't matter as much because the town is still there, whether there are people to help or not. So, Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, I think it's worth your time to check it out. And if you need to check off West Virginia as one of those states you haven't been to yet, Harpers Ferry is not a bad place to look. Resource recommendation. So I promised myself that this week I would have a resource recommendation that would be a replacement for, or at least something close to, iOverlander. And so I looked around and I found, there's Campendium and there's Allstays and there's all these things. And I went back to my list of apps that I did years ago and realized that half of them are defunct now. I looked at some of the subscription apps like The Dirt and Seeker and things like that. And I was like, none of this is really gonna do, And then it came up with this site that I started with. This is the first thing I used when I started doing Vanlife, and it's still there. But it's pretty far out of date. But, well, I'm sorry. This is the best I can do right now. I'm going to continue on this mission. But the best I can do right now is freecampsites.net. That's it. It's not an app. It's not anything fancy. It's a map that you go to on the web, and if you zoom in, there's all kinds of stuff. Now, again, a lot of it is outdated. If you find anything on here, you absolutely have to make sure it's still there. But there's a lot of stuff there, and some of it's not on iOverlander. And so if you're in a pinch, and for whatever reason iOverlander isn't a solution, and you don't know where to stay, add this to your quiver of places where you can look, and you might find exactly what you need. This place has found some sites for me that were absolutely wonderful that iOverlander didn't even have, and then I thought I should add them to iOverlander, and then I remembered, if you add things to iOverlander, often they get overrun, anyway. But check it out. freecampsites.net. I'll have a link in the show notes, but it's freecampsites.net. You can figure it out. Well, folks, thank you very much for listening to episode 252. Music, as always, is by Simon Wag. And if you need to get a hold of me, I am Jeff at builttogo.com. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. And until next time, remember this quote by... All right, I made it up with a little help from the AI. The long voyage grants a rediscovery of the familiar.